Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse, and boy, have I missed you. Apparently, when this was scheduled, I didn't know it was going to be a super moon, and my beloved colleague Bruce, his whole computer blew out. And those of you who actually believe that what goes on in the galactic sphere has nothing to do with what goes on the Earth, think again. After doing almost 400 segments of It's Rainmaking Time and starting a mission 30 years ago to put a whole new kind of finance matrix, process, and network on the map, it occurred to me that I've never really shared with my listening audience the truth about who I am, what I've been doing, and why it's important. I also want to share with you that I was offered $3.5 million for It's Rainmaking Time before I left the country. And it was the first time in my life that I actually had a moment of truth awakening that brought me to my knees. Because in all the time that I have put forth It's Rainmaking Time from my heart and did everything in my power to bring you this show, it never occurred to me that somebody would want to buy it because it wasn't even in my sphere of thinking. And when I was offered $3.5 million for that, I literally had to go to the bathroom. I got so sick hearing it. It was unexpected because It's Rainmaking Time is a sacred saying to me. It's something from my heart. It's something that is meant to call in the goodness of life, to call in solutions and discoveries, to call in happiness, to call in togetherness, to call in synchronicity, to call in alchemy and all the good things, to call in love, to call in new and ancient knowledge, higher learning, people coming together. So how could a sacred saying that was born of that be sold? The woman who offered me $3.5 million from a client that she had said, you have this wonderful archive of remarkable shows, and you could sell it to build what you're building. And I was so upset and so sad that day, and it made me realize that there are some things in life that are not for sale. While it looks like our civilization is up for sale to the highest bidder, and it doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, or where you live, that just about everything is for sale. It really made me consider coming out and sharing with you that I'm delighted that It's Rainmaking Time has been preserved, and that it is being preserved not only for this generation, but for future generations of children and people that will benefit from a saying that has energy to it, that has healing to it, that has a kind of renaissance to it, that is about the highlight and light of the human spirit. I'm Kim Greenhouse, and I'm delighted to be here today with Bruce Barker, and we will be doing live feeds, and we are testing a new platform. And this is where I really feel that you should be preparing for the unexpected. I've come back from having lived 22 months in Europe. I took a trip to Europe to see if Europeans were more receptive to new thought and to new structures than the Americans were. And I learned a lot. And one of the things that was interesting about being in Europe, and I was in 5 countries, but I lived in 4 countries. I lived in Spain, England, Germany, and Switzerland. And let me tell you, you can talk all you want about how you know what's going on in the world, and there's something about traveling that changes your life, particularly when you live in a foreign country. And there's something also that is different than just knowing things. It's like an initiation. You can refer all you want to countries around the world. Oh, there's something about being in the country, being with the people, living with them, feeling the nuances of that culture that is unlike anything you're going to read, because to feel it is to really be there. I want you also to know that, in my view, that you may be your age. In other words, whatever age you are in Earth terms, you may be that age. but you may find that you have issues that are connected to having been here many, many lifetimes, or what I call your soul age. And I want to tell you a very cute story. In the 1990s, I was representing a scientist, an inventor named Dr. Alex Belz, and he had been referred to me by a man who funded weather engineering to be able to bring rain where it was needed. And he had funded the development of Trevor James Constable's work. Trevor James Constable was able to work with ether and make it rain in different parts of the world. And this was a very controversial thing because it was involving bringing in new science, new understanding. And he had said, call him. He funds these totally new type of discoveries and solutions. So I was much younger at the time. I got on the phone and introduced myself. And within the first minute of there being a space to talk, he said, how old are you? And I said to myself in my head, how dare you say that to me? You have no right to say that to me. I thought to myself, what a jerk. But I decided to restrain my thoughts and not let them out of my mouth. And I also thought to myself, would he ask that to a guy? And I said to him, well, sir, because of the inappropriate nature of your question, you have a choice. I can either give you my earth age or my soul age. And he said, I want your earth age. And I said, because you're inappropriate, you're going to get my soul age first. And I said, my soul age is 900. And I look very good for my age. And the reason I'm sharing that with you is because, in fact, sometimes if you accept that you have been around before as a soul, that you have incarnated many times, if you accept that possibility, you may find that the issues that you work on at different soul ages, meaning how many times you've incarnated, may be very different than you thought. So I just want you to know that what I'm going to share with you today has to do with soul age. It has to do with calling in people that want to work on, cooperate, and deliver products and services and solutions and discoveries for the world. And it has to do with sharing with you where I think we really are in human history as a civilization and a few other revelations. So firstly, very happy to be back in the United States. I came back a few months before the election had completed. I had been watching what was going on YouTube from Europe, in every country I was in, and I really wanted to do a live feed from Europe to the United States and interview the outsider and the contender, and it was not able to happen in time for the election. And I was particularly shocked at how I was treated when I said I want to interview Donald Trump, because that does not mean I'm promoting him or not wanting to promote him. It means there's something about the space of an election cycle. There's something about the space of inquiry that's missing. And I was quite disturbed at the kind of conversations that were being had around the world, not just in the US, the kind of questions that were being asked and the discussion. Because for me, conversation is alchemy. Conversation lives on. And as we know, conversation lives on. You can see how a lot of people feel in the United States. There's both celebration and horror at the same time. There's also an in general woundedness of so many people not being able to fill their life's calling and destiny. And there's a lot of culprits for why we feel, all of us feel, that our country's not working or that a culture's not working, etc. So we all come in with a bias. In fact, I found out a great deal about what it means to be an American when I was in Europe. I never got it. I mean, I really didn't until I was in such a huge contrast where my American culture was showing up. But I will tell you of the many, many things I learned, not only about Europe and different countries, but about being an American, was the following. One of the greatest things of value of having grown up in the United States is that, like us or not, we are used to breathing, moving, and activating the spirit of possibility. You can be nobody known. You can have no money. You can have no credit. You can have no popularity. And people that are of like mind will still support you, at least energetically, so that you can do what you're here to do. In other words, the spirit of possibility is fed here. It's nurtured here. It's nourished here. And only when I traveled outside of the U.S., and I've only been to the 5 countries that I talked to you about, did I get how vitally important feeding the spirit of possibility really is. And I have to tell you, I returned to the United States because I felt that the spirit of possibility wasn't being welcomed and fed where I visited in Europe. I'm not saying there aren't massive entrepreneurs. I'm not saying that people aren't doing great work. I'm not saying there aren't great people all over the world, because there are. But feeding the spirit of possibility is a whole different thing. So that's what I want to say about that. The next thing I want to say is the following, which is that you and I are living and moving at a time where we are caught almost like the caterpillar that's stuck in the chrysalis. It's still half in the shell, and it's not yet a butterfly. It's a caterpillar. It's coming out, but it's not a butterfly yet. And it's in that in-between space that's so uncomfortable, so very uncomfortable. We are moving, however slowly or however fast, however you experience it, from an ownership and control-based civilization that has been run by rulers, controllers, that are so control addicted and so afraid of open space and open thought, and still are fighting to control the airwaves, control the press, control what we think. And it's very hard, because this is the reality that we're being fed. And that reality that we're being fed is a perception that those who control all of the outlets for communication want us and want to require us to be involved in. And this has impacted our way of life. This is so serious that the headlines and the kind of conversations that are being had are so serious if we're ingesting them without clear thinking, without critical thinking. For example, we even had the President of the United States go on a show and talk about how the World Wide Web needs to be curated, that it's like the Wild West, and there are facts, and then there's everything else. And what I want to say to this is the following. That is exactly the kind of rulership mentality that thinks that we should not have free thought, that we should not question everything that's going on in the world. We know that many of the ancient solutions that were here before our time, that many civilizations that were here before our time, that the people who write history are not necessarily the people that experienced the history, but are the people that are telling us what the history was. And we are all informed by history. So what I want to say is that the transition, which is being experienced at a global systemic transition level in all the structures of the world, that is mostly synthetic, is also being experienced at an energetic level. And let me give you a live example of exactly what that means. Years ago, when I was a young girl, my younger sister Jackie and I used to play bank with our older sister Karen. And we were very excited about this game. Now, Karen, because she was older than us, used to run the bank. So we would go with our Monopoly money and we would make our deposits. And one day we went to take out our deposits and she closed the bank on us. If you would have told me, hey, this is real life, this happens, you could deposit your money and not be able to get it out. Well, I never thought of that until I was at a conference and I get a letter from my bank that, hey, you can put as much money as you want in the bank, but you just can't take out what you have. And what that brings me to really is the following. I'm here to facilitate you and your bodies of work and to build platforms that will help facilitate well-being, healing, communication, and discovery. And I'm suggesting to you today, in this Super Moon Day, that almost all of the legal areas of society, the criteria for venture capital, the criteria for getting a job, the criteria for what makes somebody a reliable, accountable partner, are mostly designed in such a narrow space so as to guard the gates of a kingdom. And that kingdom that's being guarded so heavily has to do with discovery. When you're opening up discovery and new knowledge and ancient knowledge, you are ruffling the feathers, and whether you are trying to be disruptive or not, you are. Now, when I learned that potentially 70 million properties in the U.S., and those 70 million properties in the U.S., the people think they own their properties for, are in fact not proper titles, that they don't own their properties, I was in shock and ended up doing 2 shows on it. If Donna is here and can hear this right now, I'd like you to call the number that Bruce is going to give you. Bruce, give the number out for Donna.
Sure, that's 800-809-0802. I'll say that again. 800-809-0802.
I want you all to hear something that you may not know.
Hi, Donna. You're on.
Hi.
Donna, thank you so much for tuning in. I was wondering if you could tell the listeners in 2 to 3 minutes, I know it's a lot, the essence of what you found out about properties in the U.S. and the chain of title.
Well, if anybody has seen the movie The Big Short, they kind of understand exactly what happened with loans and the crash of 2008 in the real estate market. What was not realized was the impact that all that had on land titles across the country. And so I did some investigating into this and found out that up to 84% of the land records that we looked at and that have had independent audits done on them, we found out that those documents that were recorded by the banks in order to recreate chains of title and place documents to say that they owned properties was incorrect, inaccurate, missing, or just flat out fraudulent.
Could you tell them what is it about the chain of title that the title companies don't see or can't validate?
Title companies, when they look at a property and do their title searches, they take the actual documents themselves and what they say. This loan was signed from J.P. Morgan Chase to Wells Fargo or into a trust of some kind, and they accept that at face value. What my company has done is I've gotten a group of ex-senior VPs from some of the biggest title companies in the country, and I got together with some Department of Justice fraud documents examiners, and we put together a portal in which we can identify the actual fraudulent documents that said there's no way that this assignment could possibly have happened because the trust that it went into closed 6 years earlier. and that the chain of title did not properly occur. So therefore, the lender that's claiming ownership of the loans in almost 90% of the properties in this country, whether they're in foreclosure or not, commercial or residential, the lenders claiming it don't really own those loans.
And what is the impact of this for people that own property across the country, if you could translate that in 2 more minutes?
The impact of that is people are paying for properties that probably have loans that have been paid off within 72 hours, unbeknownst to them. People are being foreclosed on and losing their properties by fraudulent documentation, and I know this firsthand because it happened to me. People who think they're buying properties can probably never own them because they never got title in the first place.
And what is the implication of this to title companies across the United States?
Title companies are retroactive. They look at things from before you owned it back. This stuff happens usually with the owner going forward. So the title companies are not on the hook for this. This is not something that happened that they would cover because it did not happen before they owned it. It happened while the people that have bought the property owned it going forward. So they won't cover this. The title companies will not cover this kind of stuff. And they're not even qualified to look at and even investigate this type of fraud.
So what's the point of having a title company?
To protect you against liens and encumbrances, against title that may have happened before you own the property.
But yet it's incomplete.
It is incomplete going forward. Like I said, title insurance is retroactive. It's from before you own the property, whereas these events happened after you've owned the property.
And how is it that these events can happen after you own the property? Is something happening behind the scenes?
Well, yes, absolutely. You have no idea what happened before you own that property. We've got several clients that bought properties in fire sales and a foreclosure defense. They bought a short sale. They bought a property. They thought that it was okay, that they got title. The title company says everything was fine. When in essence, it turned out that there was a foreclosure 2 owners prior by a big one is Countrywide Loans, and we have depositions saying that Countrywide never transferred any of the properties to the investors. Bad title.
So how do people correct this?
We've developed a portal, an online portal that does an investigation, that does complete fraud. We go after and recreate the chain of title from the fraud standpoint. The name of my company is called Title Tracks, TITLETRACS.com. And we do an investigation that's very unlike anything you've ever seen. We've also been able to blow apart Bloomberg reports, who they say that, oh yes, my loan is in this trust, and we prove that it has never made it because the chain of title never happened at the county level. As much as the banks will tell you that these things are in these trusts, no, they are not in there. And the Department of Justice and the FBI also just proved that after they did a big investigation into several trusts and found out that there was no way to identify who the investors are on these loans.
Wow. For those of you who want to find out more about it, you can go to titletracks.com, but you can also listen to the interview I did with Donna. And I want to thank you for sharing this with the public. I'm going to go on with the online webcast, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thanks. Enjoying it.
Thank you. Well, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. This is an example of an old guard energetics, of lordship, of lording over, of taking control and taking ownership of something in the most insidious level. To the institutions that are doing this, to any institutions that are involved in it, they cannot fathom what kind of consciousness that one has to have to do it any other way. This is who they are. This is how they work. This is the behind-the-scenes legal and financial frameworks. This is a synthetically designed antics of rulers with no accountability to anyone. It's nothing personal. In fact, it's very impersonal. I think I would rather deal with someone who passionately disagrees with me than somebody who's indifferent. To do this means you're indifferent. And so here we are in this ownership and ruling highly competitive, insidiously competitive civilization that's about rulership and ownership and controlling everything. That is the energy of the old guard. It's not bad. It's not terrible. It's indifferent. And that is really scary. We are moving into instead of ownership and a preoccupation with that, into a stewardship space where we are concerned with good food, clean water, well-being, health and wellness, vitality, strength of spirit, personal continence, and spiritual clarity. So that's where we are. But what is running this earth into the ground is an animal level, base level, claiming turf over everything. It's like an animal that goes and sprays everything in sight. It's being run by the most highly instinctual territoriality, consciousness that exists. And it's working at a cellular and molecular level. This transition from an ownership society to a stewardship society feels different, is different. It's not that you're not passionate. It's not that you're not ambitious. It's not that you're not going to be visionary. It's not that you're going to want, all of a sudden, not want what you want. It's not that you don't have deep desires. It's going to be uncomfortable because we are living amongst tremendous malfeasance, tremendous darkness that cares not for those that are bringing light. We are living at one of the most deceptive times in our history. And not that civilizations haven't lived through that before. At every level of society, people are idolizing celebrities and famous people as their heroes. They are taking their voice to mean more than their own instincts. Things are happening so fast. Control over the net, control over communication, control over the airspace, control over water, control over agriculture, control over the food supply, control over the airspace. Little did Nikola Tesla know that his discoveries and inventions would be seized by a military-industrial complex that's using them and declaring even that they want to take command over the weather space. They want to control weather. Nikola Tesla would turn over in his grave if he could watch what's happening now. Many people have said we're living in a militarization of this civilization. And if you think we're not, think again. When you have a next generation solution and discovery, you are not merely bringing a next generation solution and discovery to the world, because the world that you're bringing it to does not play the way you do. And the people that run industries, particularly the military-industrial complex, come from a totally different gestalt, a different paradigm than we do as civilians. It's a command and control space. It's a we know better space. It's a we know what we're doing space. It's a we're protecting you space. It's a security clearance space. It's a national security run space. And it is so serious. The fact that there's no place to talk on the phone where you're not being recorded, or where your conversations aren't archived, or that you can't communicate in an email, anything that is private, or that privacy is being questioned, basic level privacy, that you can't whisper to somebody, you can't have a conversation without knowing it's recorded or being archived. That's where we're at. So the people that are bringing solutions to the world can't function in the same type of environments they think are okay now. I've had people say to me, it doesn't matter whether you're being listened to or not. Oh, yes, it does. If you want to bring what you're doing full term, there are many things that should not necessarily be public until they're ready to go. And if you don't think it's serious, you should check again. You should check the people that have brought in disruptive, incredible solutions to the world. They get national security letters. They get people that show up at their doors. They get threats. They get all kinds of things. This is not about spreading fear. This is about being mindful that just because you, the creative person or the industrial person or the entrepreneur, have what you have, doesn't mean you can just put it out there because you want to. But there will be a requisite way in which you navigate and bring forth what you bring forth, that you steward it. I can't tell you how many inventors that I have attempted to represent or worked with who absolutely, through so much arrogance, so much cockiness about the thing they got, have no clue how to steward it to stay out of trouble. None. Or what tools to use to stay out of trouble and why to use those. They don't even try. And this thing, having a messianic complex that, God gave you this and you got it all under control and God's with you and nothing can come against you. I want to tell you, beware. Beware if you come from that place and you don't think that you have to navigate on this earth in a way that causes the least amount of resistance, and that maybe there's a way to navigate it that brings in the most receptivity. In my experience, I've had 31 years of people dismissing what I brought 31 years ago when I said, I want to bring next generation solutions and discoveries to the world. I want them financed in micropayments. I want them to be done through Western Union. People laughed in my face. It was before the internet. I went all over the country, raised a bunch of money to bring people together to do it. I was 25 years ahead of my time. Here comes the internet. And even in its youth, people didn't know what a podcast was. They didn't really know what they were doing. Muhammad Yunus was doing what he was doing, but nobody much knew about him. Muhammad Yunus of the Grameen Bank, who's bringing in a whole new banking system based on trust. And it wasn't until I interviewed him, went to NPR to do a network deal with them. Didn't matter. Because the world didn't know that much about him until 2006, till they gave him the Nobel Prize. And so here I was, all these years ahead of time, ahead of where the public was. I said, it has to be done in micropayments. Well, guess what? Now with the internet, what do you call that thing? Crowdfunding. But it's not enough to have crowdfunding, because a critical mass of crowdfunding deals are not going to be financed. Why? Because the finance ministry, the kings of finance, went in and tried to control that, just like they do the SEC, just like they do all these other areas. You control the space. And one of the ways to keep people with great works out of the space is to define it and say, this is the criteria. This is the criteria by which you have a viable thing. They define what's viable. And we, as human beings, have bought it. We have bought what credibility means in business. We have bought what viability means. I remember laying on a couch with no job, bummed out because I had gone all over the country and nobody was interested in what I was talking about. They put me down. They marginalized me in their minds, laughed me off, including attorneys. I remember laying down and I wrote a letter to Bill Clinton. I'm not a political person, so when you hear this, don't listen with a political mind. I was very innocent at the time. I said, oh, he just left the presidency. Maybe I'll help raise money for a library, since nobody really could use my services. They didn't understand what I was doing. Here I am laying on a couch, and I'm virtually homeless. And I write this letter to Bill Clinton, and I send it certified. My father then dies. My mother has Alzheimer's, and he reads my letter, And I get a letter back from his chief of staff. Now, I want you to know, I was turned down all over the United States for a job, quote, a typical job. Okay? Based on criteria. I didn't fit in their box. I had massive experience. I didn't fit in their box. But I was received. My letter was read by a former president of the United States. Forget, we're not talking about the political space. Forget it. The point is that you can be virtually homeless, write a letter to anybody, communicate to anybody. You could be on your last leg and something can happen that you didn't expect. Expect the unexpected. Everything we've been told about criteria and track record isn't true. Isn't true. If you have the skills and capabilities to communicate, which is everything, and you're a person who tunes to timing, you can manifest anything you put your mind to. And so what I want you to know is I'm looking at a total expansion of criteria for funding. I'm calling in funding for totally different types of bodies of work funded in new ways that are not just slapped on crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is a space, but just like the internet, a website is like being in outer space with your star there amongst billions of stars or trillions of stars. The new commerce is based on consciousness and physics and critical thinking and imagination, which is an agency of transport that has an electromagnetic facility. It's electromagnetic. Imagination is electromagnetic. It's alchemical. You notice we never learn it in school. How do you imagine? What does it mean? How do you increase your imaginative capability so that it takes hold in the real world and has resonance in the real world? How do we invite inquiry and encourage it without dismissing all of these people that are questioning our history, what works, what we're doing, with the intent to make it better? The new commerce is not about funding everything the same way we've been funding it. We fund everything in currencies. Most of us fund everything in currencies. Replicates of money, but not in real money. We don't have contracts that have to do with transactions and businesses that are funded with real money. It's not even in the space. Well, it's there, but it's not even in the space. We don't have a way to pay people that's other than currencies. And so if somebody happens to short your currency, like somebody we know that shorted the pound sterling, well, oh well. We have a totally artificial finance oligarch running the planet with central banking. It's not about making them the boogeymen and women. It's about the fact that the central nervous system of banking is like a cancer. It's like artificially inducing cancer throughout the world. It will bankrupt communities. It will bankrupt industries. And now that we're all globally connected, nobody is in a local market anymore unless you have a retail store. We're not in a local space anymore the way we used to be. And so when you're communicating information about what you're doing and how you're doing it, your contracts, you're going to literally need engagement letters that become filters for people that don't belong in your business. You may have to walk away from legal counsel that's of the old guard, that could care less what you're trying to induce and produce. These, read the fine print contracts. I had a contract with a major station and had to walk away from them over 2 words in 2004. 2 words that would have taken my product and my intellectual property and made it theirs. We're going to have agreements that get everybody on the same page before we even have completed contracts. You don't see the cost of what's free. Your internet is not free, ever. There's nothing on the internet that's free. Because every time you land in an ecosystem, you've got a hidden cost you're never really cognizant of when you're there. Finance capital in the future, real finance capital that has vision, is not going to play this command and control game. They're going to free capital and set up a liberated, advanced solutions and discoveries that are free and clear to rock and roll. That means build your prototype, get your thing going, and get going. Your terms and conditions are going to mean everything. It's not enough to get it financed. Your terms and conditions will own you if you don't manage it, if you don't watch it, if you don't make it your priority. The terms and conditions are the consciousness of what you're interacting with. And if you don't deal with it when you're dealing with it, and you're too hungry to get the deal, you will miss the action of when they will come back for you to take what you've created. Nothing personal. Muhammad Yunus, who built the Grameen Bank, had his bank stolen from him after he funded the poorest of the poor to make sure they could get funding, they could get banking and credit. Stolen from him. How did that happen? Watch his contracts. Watch what the agreements were. Look at the ecosystem in which it was born. So there are many things that look enticing that you're going to want to get involved in to further what you're doing. Your agreements are everything. Where you're being hosted is everything. What you're using to pay with is everything. Who's around you is everything. Who's supporting you behind the scenes is everything. Who believes in you is everything. All over the world, haven't found one attorney that stepped in. Not one attorney that operated properly. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm saying they're trained and they're inculcated to function in a certain way. And at a certain time in what you're doing, you're going to need them. But they're going to have a different role in the new commerce than they did in the old commerce, in the old guard. They're going to have a different place in your venture. Totally different place. They will be peripheral, not central. The configuration of what you're doing and what you're putting forth will be essential. You want something new? You want to see something new get out there in a marvelous way? It's about the configuration between the legal, the financial, the energetic consciousness of what you're doing. That is a whole system. And until we're willing to be bold and in this transition move from an old guard ways and means with all kinds of instruments of leverage being used against people that create and bring forth new things, you'll never get out of the matrix. I want to introduce another part of this webcast. Most of us are operating in the world with a reptilian brain, concerned about what we fear, living in fear, and living in a world with an ecosystem online and in the media that produces fear and worry and anxiety. I'm not sure life is so much better with the net because it depends what we tune into. And so if you remember that we're listening and we're moving with a reptilian brain, you'll know that when the rubber meets the road, most people are going to be operating in fear. But I want to share a little story that happened to me when I was a little girl and that I think you may enjoy, just to bring in a little bit of levity here. My mother used to shop at a place called Bishop's Market in Los Angeles. I can't remember how old I was. Maybe I was 5. And my sister Jackie was in the basket. I think she was 2. She was literally in the basket. My mother walked down the meat section, put a bunch of meat in the basket with Jackie, and went up to the register, the person who was at the register. And I don't know what happened to me. I was too young to really know, but I turned to my mother and I said, "Did you bought that baby at Bishop's?" And the thing is that, you can think, oh, that's kind of a stupid little story. But when you think about it, my sister, my baby sister, was in the basket in the meat department, and we were at a market. So it seemed to me as a young child that she was purchased at Bishop's Market. And that's the distinction, an example between cause and correlation. And if you think that this isn't a major deal in the way we move and have our way to try to solve problems or even identify problems, look again. In fact, the distinction between correlation and cause is so imperative and so central to how we proceed that most of us don't even know it. The next thing I want to talk about is the following. We are being entrained in such a way that we are online, most of us, so many hours a day, that it is so important how we're training our brainwaves. Our brainwaves are locking into whatever it is that we're viewing and listening to. And so never more, at a more important time in history, are we to manage and watch and be vigilant about what we're watching and what we're allowing into our sphere. How do we dream again when you and I are living in a world with drones, with invisible stealth technology, with a mound of technology being hidden from the masses that's under a national security pact that we don't even know exists? How do we dream again? How do we move forward knowing what we know and bring light to this world at this time in human history when it looks like humanity and the planet are losing a very, very big game called life as we know it? When Donald Trump said that we are losing, I think it's a question of emphasis as well, because there's so much we're gaining. But I think if we lose our consciousness, we're going to lose everything. If we don't allow in new knowledge and let ancient knowledge from the times of Tesla and beyond in, we will not be able to recover humanity as we know and understand it. If we give technology the right to take over everything, we will lose the human imperative. Technology has to be peripheral and not made central to our lives. And that is why we are in such a vulnerable position. Just like today with Bruce, right? Today was a super moon and his entire server had a meltdown. We are all at the mercy of technology. And we have to be able to go into our community and meet people and meet our neighbors and talk to people and have dinner and lunch and breakfast with them and not forget that we are part of the human family. And we have to distinguish information from initiation. Many of you listening have been initiated into what it really means to bring any type of solution or discovery to the world. And when you're initiated, you have to work with other people who are initiated, who understand the pitfalls, the trials and tribulations of moving forward. We need to open up the kind of discussions that we're having. We need to expand the space. The domain of inquiry is not just something, but it's essential to being able to have humanity continue. We need to be able to distinguish when we're being given false information. We need to be able to disagree and to dissent. The entire scope of what it means to question something has to be rethought. Again, would you rather have indifferent leaders or people who are leaders who may passionately disagree with you? Conversation is alchemy. Conversation lives on. When we looked at the remote viewing area, we found out through the Stargate project, if those of you have tuned into it, that the past, the present, and the future are simply in a dimension. It's not enough to know that intellectually. But how is it that the remote viewers were able to go back, through the subconscious and track specific information with people that weren't even psychic? And that is because it is obviously so that the past is recorded somewhere. That everything we say, everything we do, everything we feel, everything that's going on is being recorded. And I'm not talking about by governments at this point. I'm talking about in a cosmic level. We are entering a totally different galactic time of understanding that what we thought it takes to make something happen or bring something about is going to be very different. Because we live in a future, we are entrained to a future as when the time is we will deliver or something will manifest. We are stuck in an old model of manifestation. We are not entrained yet to the possibility and potential of being able to manifest quicker, faster, in no time. One of the causal contributions of the length of time it takes for something to show up is because of resistance, negativity, and a crystallized living belief in people that whose consciousness assumes it will take X amount of time. That our relationship with time itself is a causal agency for impacting how long something takes. This is the first of many conversations to open up the space so that things can get done that can't even be communicated right now. Things like the ability to have private meetings on the phone and through email and in person and anywhere in the world with peace and dominion. Things like creating something so that more people can watch expansive conversation, television, radio, and finance things for which the existing portals are keeping them out. You have to scale a portal so that it's big enough to fund and contribute to the breakthrough solutions and discoveries. And if you don't, you can't put the bandwidth of God, for example, through a pinhole. So if you want more solutions and discoveries to come into the world, we need to work together to create and scale platforms that have the bandwidth of consciousness and structure and protocols and processes that are big enough to receive them. And they have to be planted in safe places. I think I'm going to tell another story, and then we're going to say goodbye for today. So I would like to leave a little anecdotal story about the state of the political ecosystem. And it goes like this. I was at this gathering, and many years ago, these beautiful families were gathering in the living room of this family's home. And the family had 2 children at the time. And they're all gathering and they're laughing and they're looking at each other. And all of a sudden, the room absolutely stunk beyond your imagination. And everybody's looking at each other like, what happened? Where did it come from? So the mother of this little girl, I was 2 years old, sitting on the floor, turned to the little girl and said, "Did you make a BM in your pants?" The little girl looked around the room. Everybody's looking at her. And she became embarrassed, obviously, because she turned beet red. She became self-aware. And she turned to her cousin, pointed to her cousin, and said, "No, Murky did it. Murky made a BM in my pants." And everybody broke up laughing. And 2 things. One, the moral of the story is everybody knew she did it. Her mother just wanted her to acknowledge it. But she did it. And the other part about this story is that little girl would be me. You're in very, very good hands. That little girl was me. And I want to be the first one to say that the political ecosystem, and I'm not involved in politics, don't want to be, etc. The political ecosystem needs to have a moment of truth where when it stinks really bad and it stinks over near a particular leader or person in government, it's just going to be the way it is. People are going to point. They're going to be embarrassed. They're going to turn all red, and everybody will know they did it. They blasted one or many. You can't cover that up. Whether it becomes headline news or not, you can't cover it up. Everything that you think you hide from when you do what you do is known. It's known to God. It's in the Akashic records. It's in the book of life. People around you may know it. They may not want to believe it, but they energetically know it. And so we all need to kind of come clean about where we blasted one, because it's all over the place and it permeates the political space. Permeates the political space. I wish for the people listening, not for perfection, but for well-being, for healing, for gathering together, for having a different kind of conversation, for coming to its rainmaking time, for continuing to come to its rainmaking time, and calling me at the Rainmaking Company at 626-398-8652 for those of you who may require or desire my communication capability or facilitation capability to bring something good or make something good happen. And I want to thank you all for being here. It's rainmaking time. Hit it, Bruce. I'd like to thank Bruce Barker at Right After This. And thank you so much. It's rainmaking time.